Nobody saw it coming. Not the feds, not the streets, not even him. Marco Vitali ran the West Coast like clockwork, cold-blooded, calculated, untouchable. The kind of guy who'd ghost you without blinking twice if you crossed him. His name alone made people nervous, you feel me? But then she walked into that charity gala in Beverly Hills, all class and confidence, totally clueless about who was watching her from across the room. Elena Moretti, the mayor's daughter, Stanford grad, perfect smile, perfect life, everything by the book. She was supposed to be off-limits, forbidden territory, the one person in LA he should have stayed away from. But Marco? He didn't do warnings. One look and something shifted, something dangerous started brewing that night. What he didn't know was that falling for her would blow up everything he'd built, every alliance, every rule he lived by. And what she didn't know. The man who couldn't take his eyes off her was the same ghost her father had been hunting for 5 years straight. This wasn't gonna end well for nobody, but once it started, there was no turning back, no way out, just pure chaos waiting to explode. Before we dive deeper into how this forbidden love story turned into the biggest scandal California ever witnessed, do me a solid real quick. Hit that subscribe button and smash the like right now, because if you're into stories where love and danger collide, where powerful people risk everything for what they shouldn't have, this channel is your spot. We drop intense, jaw-dropping true stories like this every single week, stories that'll have you on the edge of your seat wondering what happens next. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming in this one. The moment when Marco and Elena's worlds crashed together changed everything, and I mean everything. So subscribe now, drop that like, and let's get back to the story, because what happened next at that gala was just the beginning of something wild. Let me paint the picture for you. That April night in Beverly Hills, the Moretti Foundation Charity Gala was packed with California's elite, politicians shaking hands, businesspeople networking, champagne flowing like water. Mayor Vincent Moretti was working the room like a pro, all smiles and firm handshakes, playing the perfect public servant. His anti-crime campaign had been crushing it in the polls, his promises to clean up LA's underground operations making headlines every week. Dude was on a mission, you know what I'm saying? But what nobody in that glittering ballroom knew was that the man he'd been hunting, the ghost he'd sworn to bring down, was standing right there among them, dressed in a custom Tom Ford suit, blending in perfectly with the 1%. Marco Vitali wasn't supposed to be there. His crew had warned him, told him it was too risky, too exposed, but Marco had his reasons. Business reasons, he told himself. One of the real estate developers at the gala owed him money, serious money, and Marco needed to send a message without making it obvious. That was the plan anyway, stay low-key, handle business, bounce before anyone noticed. Clean and simple, the way he always operated. But then she appeared at the top of that marble staircase, and everything he thought he knew about staying focused went straight out the window. Elena Moretti moved through that crowd like she owned the place, which technically her family kinda did. 26 years old, dark hair falling in waves past her shoulders, emerald green dress that probably cost more than most people's rent, but it wasn't the money or the looks that caught Marco's attention. It was something else, something in the way she carried herself, confident but not arrogant, graceful but not fake. She had this energy about her, this light that seemed totally out of place in a room full of sharks and phonies. Marco watched her greet guests, hug elderly donors, laugh at terrible jokes with genuine warmth, and something twisted in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. He'd done his homework on the Moretti family, obviously. You don't survive in his world without knowing your enemies inside and out. Vincent Moretti, the crusading mayor, ex-district attorney, the man who'd built his entire political career on taking down organized crime. His wife Maria had passed away 3 years back, cancer, leaving Vincent to raise Elena alone during her final years at Stanford. The media loved their story, the devoted father and accomplished daughter, America's favorite political family, all that picture-perfect nonsense. But standing there watching Elena work the room, Marco realized the files and photos hadn't captured the real person, not even close. What Marco didn't plan on was Elena noticing him back. She'd been making her rounds, doing the whole dutiful daughter routine, when her eyes landed on the tall stranger near the bar, and something made her pause. Maybe it was the way he stood apart from everyone else, comfortable in the chaos but not part of it. Maybe it was the intensity in his dark eyes when they met hers across the room. Whatever it was, Elena felt it too, that electric pull, that moment when the rest of the world goes fuzzy and all you can see is one person. She excused herself from a conversation with some boring city councilman and started moving in Marco's direction, and that's when everything started going sideways. Marco knew he should have dipped right then, should have grabbed his coat and ghosted before she reached him, but his feet wouldn't move. He watched her approach, his mind screaming at him to leave while his body stayed planted like a tree. When she finally stood in front of him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive, she smiled and said something that would change both their lives forever. "You look like someone who doesn't want to be here," she said, her voice warm with amusement. "That makes two of us." And just like that, they were talking, really talking, not the fake networking garbage everyone else was doing. She didn't know who he was, had no clue she was chatting with California's most wanted, and Marco found himself actually enjoying the conversation, dropping his guard in a way that would have gotten him killed in any other situation. They talked about everything and nothing, stupid stuff like favorite movies and best places to eat in LA, but also deeper things, real things about family expectations and living up to other people's versions of who you should be. Elena mentioned how exhausting it was being the mayor's daughter, always having to smile, always having to be perfect, never allowed to mess up or be normal. Marco found himself relating more than he wanted to admit, talking about the weight of legacy and loyalty, though he kept it vague enough that she wouldn't connect the dots. For maybe 20 minutes they were just two people having an actual conversation at a boring party, no masks, no games, just honest connection. And that's what made it so dangerous. Marco's phone buzzed in his pocket, probably his crew telling him to wrap it up and get gone, but he ignored it. They kept talking, moved out to the balcony where it was quieter, away from the crowd and cameras. The LA skyline spread out before them, millions of lights twinkling in the distance, and for a moment Marco let himself imagine a different life, one where he wasn't who he was, where she wasn't who she was, where this could actually go somewhere. Stupid, he knew it was stupid, but standing there with Elena laughing at something he said, her eyes bright and genuine, he couldn't help himself. She asked for his name and he hesitated, knowing this was the moment to lie, to give her something fake and keep himself safe. But instead he told her the truth, or part of it anyway. "Marco," he said simply, leaving off the last name that would have sent her running. She held out her hand with a smile that made his chest tight. "Elena," she replied like he didn't already know exactly who she was. They exchanged numbers before the night ended, Elena's idea, not his. She made him promise to text her, said she'd love to continue their conversation over coffee sometime when they weren't surrounded by her father's donors and political allies. Marco nodded, knowing he'd never follow through, knowing this had to end right here tonight before things got complicated. But as he drove away from that gala, watching the mansion disappear in his rearview mirror, he couldn't stop thinking about her smile, her laugh, the way she'd looked at him like he was worth knowing. His right-hand man Tony was blowing up his phone, demanding to know where he'd disappeared to and why he'd been MIA for over an hour. Marco ignored the calls, his mind racing with thoughts he had no business thinking. By the time he pulled into his penthouse garage in downtown LA, he'd already convinced himself that texting Elena would be the worst mistake of his life. He was right about that, but not in the way he thought. 3 days passed and Marco held strong, didn't text, didn't call, tried to forget the whole thing ever happened. He buried himself in work, handled his business operations, met with his crew, focused on the empire he'd built from nothing. But Elena's face kept popping into his head at random moments, her voice, the way she tilted her head when she laughed at his jokes. It was driving him crazy, making him sloppy, and Tony noticed. "Boss, you good?" Tony asked during a meeting about their waterfront investments, catching Marco staring off into space for the third time. "Yeah, I'm solid," Marco lied, snapping back to attention. But he wasn't solid, not even close, and on the fourth day he broke. He texted her at 2 in the morning, something simple and stupid like, "Still owe you that coffee," and held his breath waiting for her response. It came 30 seconds later, like she'd been waiting up for it. "Thought you'd ghosted me. Tomorrow at 3? I know a spot in Santa Monica." That first coffee date turned into dinner, dinner turned into late-night drives along the coast, and before Marco knew what was happening, he was seeing Elena almost every day. They'd meet in quiet places, little cafes in neighborhoods where nobody knew either of them, parks on the edge of the city where they could walk and talk without cameras or curious eyes. Elena thought Marco was in commercial real estate, which technically wasn't a complete lie since he did own property all over Southern California. She never pushed for details about his work, seemed happy just being with him, and Marco found himself relaxing around her in ways that scared him. He told her things he'd never told anyone about growing up in Brooklyn, about his mother who'd passed when he was 15, about feeling like he was always trying to prove himself worthy of something he couldn't name. She shared her own struggles, the pressure of being Vincent Moretti's daughter, the expectations that came with her last name, how sometimes she felt like she was playing a character instead of living her own life. 6 weeks in and Marco was in deep, way deeper than he'd ever planned to be. He was falling for Elena Moretti, and that was a problem of epic proportions. His crew was getting suspicious, asking questions about where he disappeared to and why he wasn't answering calls during certain hours. Tony pulled him aside one night after a business dinner, concern written all over his face. "Marco, man, what's going on with you? You've been different lately, distracted. If something's up, you gotta tell me." Marco wanted to come clean, wanted to explain that he'd met someone who made him feel human again, but the words wouldn't come out. How do you tell your most trusted associate that you're dating the daughter of the man who wants to destroy everything you've built? So instead Marco brushed it off, promised Tony everything was under control, even though he knew it absolutely wasn't. The thing is, Elena was falling too, falling hard and fast for a man she thought she knew but really didn't. She'd never felt this way about anyone, never met someone who saw past the mayor's daughter label and just treated her like a regular person. Marco made her laugh, challenged her thinking, listened when she talked about her dreams of maybe teaching law someday or working in criminal justice reform. That last part killed Marco inside, knowing what he really did for a living, knowing she was talking about reforming the exact system he'd spent years learning to manipulate and avoid. Every time she mentioned her father's anti-crime campaign or expressed admiration for his dedication to cleaning up LA, Marco felt like he was being stabbed in the chest. But he couldn't stop seeing her, couldn't walk away, even though he knew the clock was ticking on this whole situation. Then came the night that changed everything, the night Marco's two worlds collided in the worst possible way. He was supposed to meet Elena at their usual spot, a quiet Italian restaurant in Venice Beach where the owner minded his own business and didn't ask questions. But that afternoon a situation developed. One of Marco's operations went sideways and he had to handle it personally. A rival crew from Oakland had made a move on his territory, trying to muscle in on his distribution networks, and Marco needed to send a clear message that LA belonged to him. The meeting was supposed to be simple, just a conversation to set boundaries and avoid an all-out war, but it went south fast. Shots were fired, Marco's guys returned fire, and suddenly there were cops everywhere, sirens screaming through the streets of East LA. Marco managed to slip away in the chaos, his driver getting him out through back alleys while police descended on the scene. His phone was blowing up with texts from Elena asking where he was, saying she was already at the restaurant waiting, worried something had happened to him. Marco's hands were shaking as he typed back some excuse about a work emergency, hating himself for lying but not seeing any other option. He showed up 40 minutes late, and Elena could tell immediately something was wrong. His energy was off, his eyes kept darting to the door, he was jumpy and distracted in a way she'd never seen before. "Marco, what's going on?" she asked, reaching across the table to take his hand. "You're scaring me. Did something happen?" He almost told her right then, almost came clean about everything, but fear stopped him cold. Fear of losing her, fear of putting her in danger, fear of seeing the disgust and betrayal in her eyes when she realized who he really was. So instead he lied, said he'd had a rough day at work, a deal falling through, nothing she needed to worry about. Elena didn't fully buy it, but she let it go, probably chalking it up to normal work stress. They finished dinner with forced conversation, both of them feeling the shift in energy but not understanding why. When Marco dropped her off that night, Elena kissed him goodbye and whispered, "Whatever you're dealing with, you can tell me. I'm here, okay?" And Marco nodded, knowing he never could. The next morning, Marco woke up to his face all over the news. Not his real face, thank God, but security footage from the East LA incident showing a figure that cops believed was connected to the Vitali crime family. The mayor himself, Vincent Moretti, held a press conference announcing a major crackdown on organized crime, specifically targeting Marco's operations. Marco watched from his penthouse as Elena's father stood at a podium, his face stern and determined, promising the citizens of Los Angeles that he would bring Marco Vitali to justice no matter what it took. "This criminal has operated in our city's shadows for too long," Vincent declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "But I promise you we will find him and we will make him answer for his crimes." The irony wasn't lost on Marco that the man vowing to destroy him had no idea Marco had been spending the last 2 months falling in love with his daughter. Marco knew he should end things with Elena immediately, ghost her completely and disappear before the walls closed in. But he was selfish, too addicted to the way she made him feel normal and human. He kept seeing her, kept lying about his identity, kept pretending he was just a regular guy with a regular job and nothing to hide. Elena noticed the changes though, noticed how paranoid he'd become, how he insisted on meeting in different places each time, how he'd tense up whenever she mentioned her father or his work. She started asking more questions about Marco's business, about his family, about why he was always so secretive. And Marco kept deflecting, kept building the wall of lies higher and higher, knowing eventually it would all come crashing down. 2 months after that first meeting at the gala, Marco made a critical mistake. He took Elena to one of his legitimate properties, a beach house in Malibu that he owned under a shell company. It was supposed to be romantic, a weekend away from the city where they could just be themselves without looking over their shoulders. Elena loved it, spent the whole first day talking about how beautiful the place was, how she could see herself living somewhere like this someday. But that night, while Elena was sleeping, Marco got a call. A serious problem, one that required his immediate attention. He tried to handle it quietly, stepping out onto the deck to take the call, but he didn't realize Elena had woken up and followed him. She stood in the doorway, hidden in shadow, listening as Marco spoke in Italian to someone on the other end, his tone harsh and commanding, using words and phrases that made her blood run cold. Words like territory, shipment, make an example, eliminate the problem. When he hung up and turned around, Elena was standing there, her face pale in the moonlight, and Marco knew from her expression that she'd heard enough to start putting pieces together that he desperately hoped she'd never find. Hold up real quick, what are you thinking right now? Drop a comment below and let me know, are you Team Marco or Team Elena? Have you ever been in a situation where someone you loved wasn't who you thought they were? Maybe you know someone who's been through something similar? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one and your experiences help me bring you more content like this. Seriously, your thoughts matter, so don't hold back. And stay with me till the end because what happens next is absolutely wild. Trust me, you need to hear how this plays out. Elena, it's not what you think, Marco started, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears because it was exactly what she thought, probably worse. Elena backed away from him, her hand reaching for the door frame like she needed something solid to hold onto. Who were you talking to? She asked, her voice shaking. What did those words mean, Marco? Territory? Shipment? Make an example? Marco ran his hand through his hair, his mind racing for an explanation that wouldn't be a complete lie but also wouldn't reveal the full truth. But looking at Elena's face, seeing the fear and confusion there, he realized he was done lying. He was exhausted from pretending, tired of living in two worlds that were never supposed to touch. Sit down, he said quietly, gesturing to the deck chairs. Please. You deserve to know the truth. Elena hesitated, everything in her body screaming to run, to get in her car and drive back to LA and never look back. But something made her stay, maybe love, maybe curiosity, maybe just the need to understand how wrong she'd been about everything. She sat down, keeping distance between them, her arms wrapped around herself like armor. Marco took a deep breath and started talking, really talking for the first time since they'd met. He told her his full name, Marco Vitali, and watched her face go white as recognition hit. He explained how he'd built his organization from nothing after his father died, how he'd taken over operations when he was barely 21, how the life had chosen him as much as he'd chosen it. Elena listened in stunned silence as Marco laid out his entire operation, the legitimate businesses that fronted the illegal ones, the network of loyalty and fear he'd constructed across California, the money and power that came with being untouchable. He didn't sugarcoat it, didn't try to make himself sound noble or justified. He just gave her the raw truth, every ugly piece of it, including the fact that her father had been hunting him for 5 years, getting closer every month. That night at the gala, Marco said, his voice rough with emotion, I wasn't supposed to be there. I had business to handle. But then I saw you and something happened that I can't explain. I should have walked away right then, should have never given you my number, should have protected you from all of this. But I was selfish, Elena. I wanted something real for once in my life, even if it was built on lies. Elena sat there processing, her mind trying to reconcile the man she'd fallen for with the criminal her father talked about in press conferences. Marco Vitali, the ghost of LA, the untouchable mob boss who'd evaded every trap the LAPD had set. And she'd been dating him, kissing him, falling in love with him, completely clueless about who he really was. My father, she whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Oh my God, my father is trying to arrest you. He talks about you at dinner, Marco. He's obsessed with bringing you down and I've been. She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the betrayal that was crushing her from both sides. She'd betrayed her father by loving his enemy, and Marco had betrayed her by lying about everything. I know, Marco said, moving closer but not touching her, respecting the space she needed. I know how messed up this is, Elena. Believe me, I've thought about it every single day. Every time you mentioned your father, every time you talked about justice and reform, I felt like the worst person alive. But I couldn't stop seeing you, couldn't give up the one good thing in my life, even though I knew it would end like this eventually. Elena looked at him, tears streaming down her face, and Marco saw his own pain reflected back at him. "Did you ever actually care about me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Or was this all just some game, some way to mess with my father?" That question hurt more than anything else could have, because Marco realized she genuinely didn't know, didn't understand that what they had was the most real thing he'd ever experienced. "Elena, look at me," he said, his voice intense and desperate. "I love you. I know I have no right to say that after everything I've kept from you, but it's true. You're the only person who's ever seen me as something other than a criminal or a business asset. When I'm with you, I'm just Marco, not the boss, not the ghost, just a guy who laughs too loud at your jokes and can't stop thinking about you. Everything else in my life is calculated and strategic, but this was never part of any plan. This just happened, and it's the best and worst thing that's ever happened to me." Elena wanted to believe him, wanted so badly to think that at least their feelings had been real even if everything else was fake. But how could she trust anything he said now? How could she separate truth from manipulation when their entire relationship had been built on deception? The next 3 hours were brutal, a back and forth of questions and answers, anger and explanations, tears and confessions. Elena demanded to know every detail, wanted to understand exactly who she'd been sleeping next to for 2 months. Marco held nothing back, explained his operations without making excuses, owned every choice he'd made, even the ones that made Elena flinch. He told her about the violence, the deals, the people he'd hurt to maintain his power. He didn't try to paint himself as a good guy caught in bad circumstances. He just showed her exactly who he was, the darkness and the light, and let her make her own judgment. And Elena, despite everything, found herself seeing the complexity in him that her father's press conferences never showed. Marco wasn't a monster, he was a person who'd made terrible choices and built an empire on those choices, but he was also the man who'd held her when she cried about her mom, who'd listened to her dreams, who'd made her feel seen in a way nobody else ever had. As dawn broke over the Malibu coastline, they were both exhausted, emotionally drained, sitting on opposite ends of the deck watching the sun rise over the Pacific. "What happens now?" Elena finally asked, her voice hoarse from crying. Marco looked at her, memorizing her face because he knew this might be the last time he'd see her this close. "That's up to you," he said simply. "You can walk away right now, go back to your life, pretend this never happened. I won't contact you again, won't put you in this position ever again. Or..." He paused, not sure he should even offer the alternative. "Or..." Elena prompted, her eyes meeting his. "Or you can stay, knowing everything you know now, knowing the danger and the complications and the impossibility of it all. But Elena, if you stay, your life will never be the same. You'll be caught between me and your father, between love and loyalty, and I can't promise you a happy ending. I can't promise you anything except that my feelings are real, and this is the only time I'll be completely honest with you." Elena sat with that choice, feeling the weight of it settle over her shoulders like a physical burden. Leave Marco and go back to her safe, predictable life as the mayor's perfect daughter, or stay with him and step into a world of secrets and danger that could destroy everything she'd built. Logic said run, self-preservation said get out while she still could. But her heart, that stubborn, foolish organ, was screaming something completely different. She stood up, walked over to where Marco sat, and did something that would seal both their fates. She kissed him, hard and desperate, pouring every conflicted emotion into that single moment of contact. When she pulled back, her decision made even though she couldn't fully explain it, she whispered, "I'm staying. God help me, I'm staying." And Marco, relief and terror mixing in his chest, pulled her close and held on tight, knowing he'd just dragged the woman he loved into the crossfire of a war that was about to explode in ways neither of them could imagine. But staying together meant playing an even more dangerous game than before. Now Elena knew the truth, which made her complicit, made her an accessory to everything Marco did. They developed systems, rules for how to navigate this impossible situation. Elena couldn't know operational details, couldn't be present for business, had to maintain complete plausible deniability if things ever went south. Marco assigned security to watch her without her knowledge, making sure his enemies couldn't use her as leverage against him. They met even more secretly than before, paranoid about surveillance, about anyone making the connection between them. And at home, Elena had to sit across the dinner table from her father while he ranted about his progress in the investigation against Marco Vitali, had to nod and smile and pretend she wasn't dying inside every time Vincent got closer to the truth. The double life was killing Elena slowly, eating away at her from the inside. She loved her father, respected everything he built, believed in his mission to make LA safer. But she also loved Marco, understood the complicated circumstances that had shaped him, saw the man behind the reputation. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming, trying to hold both truths in her head simultaneously without losing her mind. She started making mistakes, small ones at first. Showing up late to family dinners because she'd been with Marco. Defending organized crime in abstract conversations with her father, playing devil's advocate in ways that made Vincent look at her strangely. Her behavior was shifting and people were noticing, including her father's chief of staff who'd known Elena since she was a kid and could tell something was seriously wrong. 4 months into their impossible relationship, the situation reached a breaking point that nobody saw coming. Vincent Moretti's investigation had finally produced a major breakthrough, real evidence linking Marco to multiple criminal operations, enough to build a case that would stick in court. The DA was preparing warrants, planning a coordinated raid that would take down Marco's entire organization in one massive operation. Vincent was ecstatic, calling Elena to share the news over dinner, his voice filled with triumph and vindication. "We finally got him, sweetheart," he told her, his eyes bright with victory. "After 5 years of chasing shadows, we're about to bring Marco Vitali down. The raid happens in 72 hours. Elena felt the world tilt beneath her feet, her fork clattering onto her plate. 72 hours. 3 days before the man she loved would be arrested, his life destroyed, everything crashing down around him. She excused herself from dinner, claiming a headache, and locked herself in her childhood bedroom with her phone clutched in shaking hands. She needed to warn Marco, needed to give him time to run or hide or do whatever it took to avoid capture. But doing that would make her a criminal too, would betray everything her father had worked for, would destroy their family if anyone ever found out. Elena sat on her bed, paralyzed by the impossible choice in front of her. Save the man she loved or stay loyal to her father and let justice take its course, whatever that meant. Every instinct screamed at her to text Marco immediately, to give him the heads up that would save his life. But her hands wouldn't move, frozen by the weight of what that decision would mean. Hours passed with Elena staring at her phone, writing and deleting messages over and over, her mind spinning in circles trying to find some third option that didn't exist. Finally, at 3 in the morning, she made her choice. She texted Marco a single word that would change everything: run. Then she turned off her phone, crawled under her covers and waited for her world to explode. Marco got the message while in a meeting with his crew, his blood running cold as he read that one syllable. He knew immediately what it meant, knew Elena had just committed a felony to save him, knew the clock was ticking on whatever time they had left. He cleared the room, made a series of rapid-fire calls, set in motion an evacuation plan he'd hoped he'd never have to use. By dawn, Marco had moved his most important assets, destroyed evidence, relocated key personnel, and essentially vanished into thin air. When the raids came 72 hours later, the FBI and LAPD found empty warehouses, abandoned offices, and cold trails. Marco Vitali had ghosted completely, along with his top associates, leaving behind only legitimate businesses that couldn't be touched legally. Vincent Moretti was devastated, furious, convinced someone had leaked information about the operation. An internal investigation was launched immediately, looking for the mole who'd tipped off their target. Elena watched it all unfold with her stomach in knots, terrified that somehow they'd traced the leak back to her, that her single text would be discovered and her life would implode. But Marco had been smart about it, covered his tracks in ways that made the tip look like it came from inside law enforcement rather than from the mayor's daughter. Elena was never questioned, never suspected, though the guilt ate at her constantly. She hadn't heard from Marco since sending that text, had no idea where he was or if he was safe. He'd disappeared completely, protecting her by cutting all contact, making sure no connection could be drawn between them if anyone started digging. The silence was worse than anything Elena had experienced, not knowing if she'd ever see him again, wondering if she'd destroyed her relationship with her father for a man who was now just a ghost. Weeks turned into months, and life moved forward in that strange way it does after everything falls apart. Vincent's investigation stalled out completely, Marco Vitali becoming more myth than man, a cautionary tale about the ones who got away. Elena went through the motions of her regular life, smiling at public events, attending family dinners, pretending she wasn't hollow inside. Her father never knew how close he'd come to catching Marco, never knew his own daughter had been the one who saved his greatest enemy. The secret sat between them at every meal, invisible but suffocating, changing their relationship in ways Vincent couldn't understand and Elena couldn't explain. Then, 6 months after Marco disappeared, Elena's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Her heart stopped as she read the words, "Rooftop garden at the Westwood Hotel. Midnight. Come alone." She knew that handwriting pattern, knew the way Marco phrased things even through text. He was back, or at least close enough to risk contact, and he wanted to see her. Every rational thought told Elena to delete the message, to ignore it and move on with her life, to stop playing with fire before she got burned beyond recognition. But her heart had other plans, and as midnight approached, Elena found herself driving to Westwood, parking in a garage 3 blocks away, and making her way to the hotel like a woman walking toward her own execution. Marco was waiting on the rooftop, his back to the door, staring out at the LA skyline that had once been his kingdom. He looked different, thinner, tired, like the last 6 months had aged him years. When he turned and saw Elena, something in his expression broke and reformed simultaneously. They didn't speak at first, just stood there taking each other in, 2 people who'd been through hell separately and somehow survived. "You saved my life," Marco finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know what that cost you, Elena. I know what you sacrificed." Elena crossed the distance between them, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Are you safe?" she asked, ignoring his gratitude because acknowledging it would make her break down completely. "For now," Marco replied honestly. "But I can't stay in LA, can't go back to that life. Everything I built is gone, Elena. The empire, the power, the respect, all of it. I'm starting over somewhere else, somewhere they'll never find me." The unspoken question hung between them like smoke. Elena heard it even though Marco didn't voice it. "Come with me. Leave your life behind, leave your father, leave everything you know and run away with a wanted criminal to some unknown place where you'd always be looking over your shoulder." It was insane, impossible, the kind of choice that only existed in movies and terrible romance novels. But standing there on that rooftop with the man she'd risked everything for, Elena felt the pull of it, the temptation to just say yes and let the chips fall where they may. "I can't," she whispered, even though every part of her wanted to scream the opposite. "My father, my life here, I can't just disappear. It would destroy him, Marco. He's already lost so much." Marco nodded like he'd expected that answer, like he'd known from the beginning how this would end. "I know," he said simply. "I just needed to see you one more time, needed to say thank you and goodbye properly." They stood together watching the city lights, both knowing this was it, the final chapter of something that should never have started. Marco pulled Elena close, memorizing the feel of her in his arms, storing it away for the lonely nights ahead. "In another life," he murmured against her hair, "we could have been happy. Normal jobs, normal problems, maybe a house in the suburbs and a couple of kids. In another life, you wouldn't be who you are and I wouldn't be who I am, and this would be simple." Elena laughed through her tears because the idea was so absurd and beautiful. "In another life," she agreed, her voice breaking. They kissed one last time, pouring 5 years' worth of what-ifs and might-have-beens into that final moment of contact. Then Marco stepped back, his hand lingering on her cheek before falling away completely. "Be happy, Elena," he said. "Find someone good, someone who deserves you, someone who can give you the life I never could. Promise me." Elena couldn't speak, could only nod as tears streamed down her face. Marco turned and walked toward the rooftop door, each step taking him further from the only real thing he'd ever had. But just before he disappeared, he looked back one last time, his eyes holding hers across the distance. And in that look, Elena saw everything they'd never get to be, all the futures that had died the moment they'd met at that charity gala. Then he was gone, swallowed by the stairwell darkness, and Elena was alone on the rooftop with nothing but memories and regrets. She stood there until dawn started breaking over the city, until she had no more tears left to cry. Then she went home, crawled into bed, and tried to figure out how to live with the choices she'd made. Vincent never knew, never suspected that his daughter had been in love with his greatest enemy, that she'd been the reason Marco Vitali had escaped justice. Elena carried that secret for the rest of her life, a weight that never got lighter, only more familiar. Years passed and Elena did exactly what Marco had asked. She found someone good, a civil rights attorney who made her laugh and treated her right. She got married in a ceremony her father cried through, built a career in criminal justice reform that made her mother's memory proud. She had the life she was supposed to have, the one that looked perfect on paper and mostly felt okay in practice. But sometimes, late at night when her husband was asleep beside her, Elena would find herself wondering about Marco, about where he'd ended up and if he ever thought about her too. She'd wonder if he'd found peace somewhere, if he'd managed to leave his old life behind completely, or if he still carried their story around like a scar that wouldn't fade. The truth was, some stories don't get tidy endings. Some loves aren't meant to work out, no matter how real they feel in the moment. Elena and Marco proved that sometimes the right person comes along at the absolute wrong time, and all the feelings in the world can't change the fundamental incompatibility of your worlds. They'd had their moment, brief and intense and completely unsustainable, and then life had pulled them back to their separate corners where they belonged. It wasn't fair and it wasn't satisfying, but it was real, and maybe that was worth something in itself. But here's the thing that nobody knew, the final twist in a story full of them. Marco never actually left California, never ran away to start fresh somewhere new. He'd been bluffing that night on the rooftop, testing Elena one final time to see if she'd choose him over everything else. When she said no, when she chose her father and her life over running away with him, something in Marco broke permanently. He realized he'd been living in a fantasy, believing love could conquer the impossible odds stacked against them. So he made a choice that would shock everyone who'd ever known him, a choice that would change LA forever in ways nobody saw coming. Wait, hold up, you thought that was the end? Oh, you have no idea what Marco did next. The decision he made after Elena walked away that night literally changed the entire game in Los Angeles, shifted power in ways that are still being felt today. This story goes so much deeper than a forbidden romance. It's about redemption, revenge, and choices that echo through generations. I've got the full continuation ready for you right now, the part where everything you just heard gets flipped completely on its head. Click on the next video, the one I'm putting right here on your screen, because what happens when Elena discovers what Marco's really been planning will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you've come this far, you cannot miss how this actually ends. The real ending is even crazier than you think, and I promise you'll be glad you kept watching. Don't leave now, not when we're this close to the truth. Click that video, let's finish this story the right way. I'll see you there in 5 seconds.